Jimmy Fallon was laughing mid-interview when Oscar Isaac heard a voice and felt completely silent. That voice was coming from 22 years ago. The Tonight Show. Studio 6B at Rockefeller Center. Tuesday night, packed audience, cameras rolling smoothly. Oscar Isaac was promoting his latest film, sitting in the guest chair looking effortlessly charismatic in a dark suit. Jimmy was in his element, animated, energetic, bouncing between questions and jokes with his signature enthusiasm. They were talking about Oscar's childhood in Guatemala. Funny stories about growing up, learning English, moving to Miami as a kid. The audience was eating it up. Oscar was charming and self-deprecating, telling a story about his first school play in America where he'd mispronounced every single line. Jimmy was laughing, that big, genuine Fallon laugh that made him America's favorite late-night host. His hands were gesturing wildly as he set up another question. "So your family must have been so proud when you..." And then a voice came from the back of the studio. "Oscarcito." Not loud. Not shouting. Just one word, spoken with such love and familiarity that it cut through 300 people and a full band and all the noise of live television like a knife. Oscar Isaac stopped breathing. His entire body went rigid. The smile vanished from his face. His hand, which had been resting casually on the armrest, suddenly gripped it so tightly his knuckles turned white. His head turned sharply toward the back of the studio, away from Jimmy, away from the cameras, toward the source of that voice. Jimmy's laugh died mid-sound. His hands froze mid-gesture. He looked at Oscar, then followed Oscar's gaze toward the back of the studio, confusion spreading across his face. The audience felt the shift immediately. 300 people who had been laughing seconds ago fell into uncertain silence. The Roots stopped playing the background music. Questlove lowered his drumsticks. Oscar's eyes filled with tears. Jimmy stopped mid-joke. The entire studio froze. In the back corner of the studio, near the entrance where audience members typically lined up before taping, stood an elderly woman. Gray hair pulled back neatly. Simple but elegant clothing. Wrinkled hands clasped together at her chest. Her face was wet with tears, but she was smiling, that specific smile of someone who has waited a very long time for this moment. Security personnel stood nearby, clearly unsure whether to escort her out or let this play out. One of them had his hand on his radio, waiting for direction from the control room. But nobody in the control room was giving directions. Producer Michael Shoemaker stood behind the director, staring at the monitors, watching Oscar Isaac's face, understanding on some instinctive level that they were witnessing something real. "Keep rolling," Michael said quietly. "Don't cut. Keep every camera rolling." On stage, Jimmy was looking between Oscar and the woman in the back corner, trying to understand what was happening. Oscar hadn't moved. Hadn't blinked. Just stared at the elderly woman like she was a ghost. "Oscar?" Jimmy said softly, all traces of his performance persona gone. Do you know that person?" Oscar tried to speak. His mouth opened but no sound came out. He tried again. "Abuela?" he whispered, so quietly the microphones barely caught it. "Abuela Rosa." Jimmy stood up immediately. Not the casual standing he did sometimes during interviews. This was urgent, protective. He stepped around his desk and moved toward Oscar, one hand reaching out like he might need to steady his guest who looked like he might fall over. "Your grandmother?" Jimmy asked. Oscar nodded, still unable to speak, tears now streaming freely down his face. Jimmy turned toward the back of the studio, toward the elderly woman. "Ma'am? Would you like to come up here?" The woman, Abuela Rosa, took one hesitant step forward, then another. The audience parted instinctively, creating a path down the center aisle. Security personnel stepped back, understanding this was something beyond their protocols. She walked slowly, her age evident in her careful steps, but her eyes never left Oscar's face. With each step closer, Oscar's composure crumbled further. By the time she reached the stage steps, Oscar was sobbing openly. Hollywood actor, sophisticated star, reduced to a child in the presence of the grandmother he thought he'd lost. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what happened 22 years ago. Oscar Isaac wasn't always Oscar Isaac, acclaimed actor and star of blockbuster films. In 2002, he was just Oscar Isaac Hernandez, a 23-year-old drama student at Juilliard in New York, struggling to make rent, working restaurant jobs between classes, dreaming of a career that seemed impossibly far away. He'd grown up in Miami, but his roots were in Guatemala. His family had immigrated when he was 5 months old. His mother, his father, and his grandmother Rosa, who had raised him alongside his parents. Abuela Rosa had been the heartbeat of their household. She cooked, she sang, she told stories about Guatemala in the evenings while Oscar sat at her feet listening. She called him Oscarcito. Little Oscar. Even as he grew taller than her, even as he became a teenager with dreams bigger than Miami, she never stopped calling him that. When Oscar got accepted to Juilliard, full scholarship, one of the most prestigious acting programs in the world, Abuela Rosa had cried tears of joy. She'd held his face in her weathered hands and said, "You will be great. You will make us all so proud. But never forget where you come from, Oscarcito. Never forget who you are." Oscar promised he wouldn't. He moved to New York in 2001, threw himself into his studies with ferocious intensity. The program was brutal, 12-hour days, constant criticism, the pressure of being surrounded by the best young actors in the country. But Oscar thrived. He was talented, dedicated, hungry. He called home every Sunday. Talked to his mother, his father, and always Abuela Rosa. She would ask about his classes, his friends, whether he was eating enough. "You're too skinny, Oscarcito," she'd say. "Come home and let me feed you." In December 2002, Oscar got a call from his mother. Abuela Rosa had suffered a stroke. She was in the hospital. It was serious. Oscar got on the first flight to Miami. Sat in the ICU holding her hand, watching machines beep and whir, praying in Spanish and English and any language he could think of. The doctors said the next 48 hours were critical. Abuela Rosa woke up on the second day. Weak, barely able to speak, but she recognized Oscar immediately. She squeezed his hand and tried to smile. "Oscarcito," she whispered. "I'm here, Abuela. I'm right here. You have to go back," she said, her voice thin as paper. "Your school. Your dreams. Don't stop for me. I'm not leaving you. Promise me," she insisted, using what little strength she had. "Promise me you'll go back. You'll finish. You'll become everything you're meant to be." Oscar promised, even though it broke his heart. 3 days later, when Abuela Rosa was stable enough to leave ICU, he flew back to New York. He missed the first week of the spring semester, but he made it back. 2 weeks later, while Oscar was in the middle of a scene study class, his phone buzzed. Then buzzed again. And again. He ignored it. Phones were supposed to be off during class. But his scene partner noticed his face had gone pale. During the break, Oscar checked his messages. 12 missed calls. All from his mother. Abuela Rosa had suffered another stroke. This one massive, devastating. She'd been rushed to the hospital, but by the time they got her there, it was too late. She died surrounded by family. Everyone except Oscar, who was 1,000 miles away in a Juilliard classroom learning about emotional recall. He made it back for the funeral. He gave a eulogy that he barely remembered. He stood at her grave and felt like something essential had been ripped out of his chest. The guilt was crushing. He'd promised to stay. He'd promised to be there. And when it mattered most, he wasn't. After the funeral, Oscar returned to New York and threw himself into work with almost manic intensity. He studied harder, auditioned more, took any role he could get. He told himself Abuela Rosa would want him to succeed, that honoring her memory meant achieving the dreams she'd believed in. But he never forgave himself for not being there when she died. Over the next 22 years, Oscar Isaac became exactly what Abuela Rosa had predicted. He starred in blockbusters, won awards, worked with the greatest directors in Hollywood. His face appeared on magazine covers and movie posters worldwide. And through it all, he carried the guilt of those final 2 weeks. The promise he made. The bedside he hadn't been at. Until tonight. When a voice from 22 years ago called his childhood nickname in a New York television studio. Behind the scenes, Fallon made a decision that defied every producer's expectation. Abuela Rosa reached the stage. She stood at the bottom of the steps, one hand on the railing, looking up at Oscar. Oscar stood from the guest chair on shaking legs. He took 2 steps toward her, then stopped, like he was afraid she might disappear if he got too close. "Abuela?" His voice cracked on the word. "But you died. I went to your funeral. I stood at your grave." The elderly woman shook her head slowly, tears streaming down her weathered face. "No, Oscarcito. I didn't die." The audience gasped. Jimmy Fallon's hand went to his mouth. "What?" Oscar whispered. "The second stroke," Rosa said, her English accented but clear. "It was bad. Very bad. The doctors said I wouldn't recover. Your mother, she thought I was going to die. She called you, she told everyone. But then..." She paused, steadying herself. "Then I woke up. 3 days later I woke up." Oscar was shaking his head, unable to process what he was hearing. "That's impossible. I was at your funeral. I saw..." "You saw a closed casket," Rosa said gently. "Because there was no body. Your mother couldn't reach you in time. You were already on a plane. And by the time you arrived, your whole family had decided, we decided it was better to let you believe. To let you grieve and move forward. Because if you knew I was alive but damaged, barely able to walk or speak, you would have stayed. You would have given up Juilliard. Given up your dreams to take care of me. Of course I would have." Oscar's voice rose, anguished. "You're my abuela. I would have." "Exactly," Rosa interrupted firmly, "with the authority only a grandmother can wield. That's exactly why we didn't tell you. Because I didn't survive that stroke to watch you give up everything for me. Your mother and I, we made a choice. We let you grieve so you could be free to become who you were meant to be." Jimmy Fallon was crying openly now, not even trying to hide it. The cameras captured every moment. This wasn't television anymore, it was life happening in real time. Oscar covered his face with his hands. 22 years. I've carried the guilt of not being there when you died for 22 years. Every success, every moment of my career, I've thought Abuela Rosa should be here to see this. But I have been here, Rosa said, climbing the first step slowly. Every movie. Every award. Every interview. I've watched all of it. I've been so proud. Your mother sends me everything. She shows me videos. I've seen you become everything I knew you would be. Why now? Oscar asked, his voice barely audible. Why tell me now? Rosa climbed another step, getting closer. Because I'm 87 years old, Oscarcito. And I've been healthy for 10 years now. The doctors say I'm a miracle. And I realize, I don't want to actually die before I tell you the truth. Before I tell you how proud I am. Before I hold my grandson one more time. But this is the moment no one in the studio, and no one watching at home, ever saw coming. Oscar moved. He didn't walk down the steps, he ran. He practically fell down them, catching himself on the railing, and then he was in his grandmother's arms. They held each other and sobbed. 22 years of grief, guilt, and love pouring out in the middle of a television studio, while 300 strangers and millions at home witnessed a resurrection. Jimmy stepped back, giving them space. He pulled a handkerchief from his jacket pocket, the one his own grandmother had embroidered for him years ago, and placed it quietly on the stage beside them. When they finally pulled apart, Oscar was laughing through his tears. You let me think you were dead for 22 years? To give you life, Rosa said simply, cupping his face in her hands the way she had when he was 5 years old. Was I wrong? Oscar shook his head, unable to speak. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. After the show, Oscar took his grandmother to dinner. They talked for 6 hours. The next week, he flew his entire family to New York for a reunion 22 years overdue. Jimmy's embroidered handkerchief sits framed in Oscar's home office. Below it a note. For the grandmother who died so I could live, and lived so I could forgive. Abuela Rosa is 90 now. She attends every premiere. And Oscar never misses Sunday dinner.